I came up to section 33 of CPC. Today I am going to touch on the provision of interest. While passing a decree in a suit for money, the court is empowered to award interest also. Now, how long or for what period the court is empowered to award interest over the amount adjudged. The amount adjudged is nothing but the principal amount plus the interest that is accrued till the date of filing the suit. That is the amount adjudged. Now the court is empowered to grant or award interest on that amount adjudged. Therefore, now the period for awarding such interest is divided into three parts. The first part being up to filing the suit. That means from the date of cause of action and also up to filing the suit is the first part of the whole period. The second part is the time or the period starting from the date of suit till the date of passing the decree. The decree will be passed after completion of the trial. Therefore, that period during which the case was pending and ending in the decree is the second part of the period. For this period also, the court is empowered to grant interest. And the other period, the third period is commencing from the date of the decree up to the date of realization. That is payment of money, actual payment of money to the decree holder. Therefore, the whole period is divided into three periods for the purpose of awarding interest under section 34. What is the amount of interest that can be awarded? This amount that can be awarded before filing the suit is also discretionary. The court may grant or may not grant. The specific reason being that while a suit is being filed for money, the plaintiff will always calculate the amount of interest that is accrued up to the date of suit. Therefore, when he files the suit, he will claim the entire amount with the interest till then that is accrued. Therefore, the court may be reluctant to award interest for that period. It may grant or may not grant, there's no compulsion, because the interest that has been accrued till then forms part of the amount which is claimed in the suit. That is the principal amount. Therefore, the court may grant or may not grant. It is absolutely the discretion that it can even ignore. Then for the period commencing from the date of suit till the date of passing the decree, it is also the discretion. The court has to give a rate of interest only according to its discretion. But this discretion should be a reasonable exercise of power on the part of the court. Then I will come to that part a little later. Then afterwards, after passing the decree, the court is empowered to grant interest on the amount adjudged. That is, till the date of realization, the court will grant an interest not exceeding 6%. Therefore, it is specific, not exceeding 6%, or you can say it is even 6%. The court will always grant 6% of interest after passing the decree till the date of payment. That is at 6%. But it is a discretion where it can even be reduced. But not exceeding 6% is a must. Therefore, it is a must. Then for the period during the pendency, this is also the amount of interest that is awarded should be reasonable. You kindly take a note, it is reasonable. This reasonable means is also not defined elsewhere, but it has to keep within bounds. But in case of a commercial transaction, the court can give up to 12% or the percentage of interest that is normally levied by nationalized banks. Therefore, every court is now supposed to be aware of the bank interest. That is interest that is levied by the nationalized bank in cases of commercial transaction. Therefore, reasonable rate of interest means the interest that is normally leviable by a nationalized bank in respect of their loans. Therefore, that is reasonable. Then in respect of this period, after passing the decree, if it is a commercial transaction, then the court can give a little more than 6% after a decree, if it is a commercial transaction. But in cases wherein there is a contract between the lender and the borrower about the fixation of interest, and if it is a commercial transaction, the court can grant interest, but not beyond the interest that is specified in the contract. Therefore, it cannot exceed beyond the limit that is prescribed in the contract. Right? But it may be above 6% prescribed for that portion of the period. If there is a contract, the court can award a little more interest than 6%, but below the contractual amount of interest. Therefore, with regard to this award of interest, it is very specific. The court cannot award unreasonable interest like a commercial transaction. Suppose if the party is not able to pay and there is a genuine claim or genuine defense, it may restrict to very, very minimum interest. But 6% interest is a must, always a must. But though it is a discretion, but the court will always intervene. The higher court will always intervene and grant some interest. Therefore, that's 6% interest is I may even say it is compulsory on the part of the court to grant that interest. Therefore, that is with regard to interest. Then we will come to execution. We have been speaking about execution only. This execution part of it commences from section 36. The procedure for execution is given under section 36. These procedures are applicable not only to the main decree passed in a suit, and also orders passed in IAs. IAs means interlocutory applications. There may be various applications filed during the pendency of the suit, and in respect of orders that is passed in IAs, that order may also be sometimes executable. In the sense, we can get relief by approaching the court for the relief that is rendered by way of execution only. Therefore, the procedure prescribed for executing a main decree is also applicable to the orders passed during the pendency of the suit in IAs. Therefore, these procedures are applicable to both the decrees and orders passed in IAs during the pendency of the suit. Then section 37 deals with definition of court which passes a decree. This is an important provision. Kindly take note. The court which is deemed to have passed a decree is none other than the court which has actually passed the decree. Then on conclusion of the trial, the court will render a verdict followed by a decree also, or with a decree. Therefore, that decree can be executed at the court of first instance. The court of first instance is nothing but the court which we approach for the first time while filing a suit. That is the court of first instance. The court of first instance, we have to approach for executing the decree passed by it, or the very court which passed the decree is the executing court, unless by orders or convenience a different court is prescribed. But for the present, you have to understand the very court which passed the decree is the executing court. You can approach that very court itself and file a petition for executing. That is the court of first instance. Suppose if the case is taken up in appeal, and in the appeal it is reversed. A suit decreed by the trial court is reversed in the appeal. Then no decree can be executed because the suit of the plaintiff is dismissed. Suppose if it is taken in appeal to the high court and the order of the appellate court is reversed, then the decree passed by the high court will be the decree that can be executed, not in the high court or not in the appellate court, but only in the court which dismissed the suit. Though it has dismissed the suit, it will be taken as if this is a continuation of the suit, and also the order passed by the high court will be taken as if the suit has been decreed by the trial court itself. Therefore, whenever a decree is passed, either in the first appellate court or in the high court by way of a second appeal, that decree can be executed only by the trial court trial court which rendered that decree. Therefore, then in cases wherein the suit is dismissed, filed by the plaintiff, the suit is dismissed, then the plaintiff will take it up to the first appellate court. Suppose, say for example, the first appellate court decrees the suit or allows the appeal and decrees the suit, then it will merge with the order passed by the trial court. The judgment is nothing but the judgment, it will be deemed as if it has been passed by the trial court. Therefore, the decree that has been given or rendered in the first appellate court will be deemed to have been passed by the trial court. You can execute it, approach the trial court for executing. Then it will be treated as if that decree has been passed by the executing court. Then, in case that there may be some problems also. In case the decree is passed by the trial court, it is taken up in an appeal, first court, and also the high court by way of second appeal. Then by the time the plaintiff gets the decree, the court which passed the decree may not be there. In the sense, suppose the subject matter of the suit is taken away from the jurisdiction of the court which rendered the decree or which gave the decree, is taken away and transferred to another territory or territory over which another court has jurisdiction, or that is coming within the jurisdiction of some other court. By the time he obtains the decree in a higher court, and when he comes down for execution, this suit property might have been transferred to the area of another court. In those cases, both courts are having jurisdiction. Though the subject matter has been taken away and that is now made a part of the territory within the jurisdiction of some other court, then both the court will have jurisdiction. They can straight away approach the trial court which passed the decree, and also the court to which the subject matter of the suit, say for example, the immovable property has been transferred to the jurisdiction of another court. They can approach straight away another court also. Therefore, in those cases where subject matter is taken away, that immovable property, which is the subject matter of the property, is taken away and it is made part of another the area coming within the jurisdiction of another court, both court will have concurrent jurisdiction. It is at the option of the parties. Then take for example, subcourt. The subcourt is entertaining a suit, and the area has been now the property in respect of which that the suit has been filed is taken away to some other court. And when the decree is passed, that subject matter is not there, then as I have already said, both the courts will have jurisdiction. You can approach either of the courts. And in those cases, this court, suppose if the party wants to approach the other court to which the subject matter is transferred, that court is treated as the court of first instance. As far as the execution of the decree is concerned, it will be treated as the court of first instance, as in the case of the original court or the court which entertained the suit. There were both courts will be treated as the court of first instance. In those circumstances also, the second court to which the subject matter is transferred will exercise the power of execution over the decree passed by another court. And then you have to take, or you have to understand, the first appeal is treated as continuation of the suit. Therefore, when a matter is taken up, as soon as a decree is passed or a suit is dismissed, the aggrieved party will approach the first appellate court. Therefore, he can file an appeal that is called first appeal. This first appeal is filed under section 96 of the CPC. As far as the first appellate court is concerned, it can go into the merits of the case by referring to the documents produced and also the witnesses, the deposition of witnesses, everything it can consider. Just like it is considered by the trial court, the first appellate court also considers the entire matter, including the evidence, deposition, and also other documents. filed before the trial court can be reappraised by the first appellate court. Therefore, now in law, the first appellate court is treated as a court, as a court of extension, or it is the suit, or the first appeal is treated as the continuation of the suit. Therefore, whenever any decree is passed in the first appellate court, it will be treated as the decree passed by the trial court. Therefore, you have to take a note, the first appeal is the continuation of the suit. Therefore, there is no difference between the trial court as well as the first appellate court as far as appreciation of evidence or appreciation of the very case itself is concerned. The first appellate court is nothing but the extension of the extension of this suit. And when it is decreed by the appellate court, it will be deemed, or it will be construed to be passed in the same suit or in the same court. Therefore, there is no difference at all. It can be executed in the court of first instance, that is called the trial court. Then, one case is, suppose if the suit, judgment is taken up in appeal to the first appellate court, and the first appellate court also reverses the decree, then it goes to the high court by way of second appeal. When the second appeal is decided, and also after reversal of the judgment by the first appellate court, the plaintiff approaches the high court by way of second appeal. The plaintiff's case is accepted. That means the high court restores the decree passed in favor of the plaintiff by the trial court is restored by the high court in the second appeal. By the time the high court passes the order or grants the decree in the second appeal, this jurisdiction of the court is divided between two courts. Say, for example, formally it was filed in the court of Tirupattur, and the jurisdiction under that court of Tirupattur is transferred to the nearby court, that is Ambur. Then, when the plaintiff comes back for execution, after getting the decree in the suit, he can file the execution petition in Ambur court also, where he did not file the suit. But the court will say that Ambur court is also having jurisdiction. It will be treated as the court of first instance, because during the pendency of this litigation or the case, it has been transferred to Ambur court. Therefore, Ambur court will have the jurisdiction. Therefore, this is how the court will exercise jurisdiction. But you have to understand, in these matters, the plaintiff himself can approach the court, either the court where he actually filed the suit or the court to which the subject matter has been transferred. This is his option. Without intervention of court, he can file the suit, file the execution petition right away, either in one court where he filed the suit or in the other court to which that subject matter is transferred. He can always do so. It is his option. But the other provisions which I am going to say a few minutes now is section 38. The section 38 deals with the decree is sent for execution. Sometimes it is not as if the court has no power at all. The court also can send the decree for execution to another court. But under what circumstances the court will send the decree for execution to another court? That is provided under section 38. But 38 provides for a requirement. That means, according to section 38, the party has to approach the court, saying that this defendant is now residing or permanently reside in another place within the jurisdiction of another court, or permanently working for the jurisdiction of another court, and also he is working for gain in the jurisdiction of another court. There, and also the property situated in the jurisdiction of another court. He can simply point out and say that the decree that may be passed or that is passed may be transferred to that court for that is the very word is transmission. The decree may be transmitted to another court, adjoining court or any other court. But it may not be a court, as we have seen last, that the subject matter is transferred. It is not that. Here it is he will point out, the decree holder will point out that the defendant is residing in some other place within the jurisdiction of another court. That means residing means permanently residing, working for gain, and also working for gain and also permanently residing. In those occasions, if the decree can be executed personally against the defendant, that can be transmitted. And also in cases where the subject matter of the property is not, that is included in the suit, is not sufficient for execution, for satisfaction of the decree, he can point out that the defendant is having other properties also in a jurisdiction or in an area within the jurisdiction of another court. He can point out and also ask for transmission of the decree to that court. Here, the difference between the earlier section, that is section 37 and 38. The earlier section says that it is the option of the party or option of the plaintiff or decree holder to approach any one of the court. Here, only on application and also only after the court passes an order transmitting the decree, alone he can file an EP there. Therefore, there's a subtle difference between these two sections. And there are 4 or 5 conditions, kindly take them. If the person against whom the decree is passed actually and voluntarily resigns or carries on business or personally works for gain within the local limits of such other court. And next is, if such a person has no property within the local limits of the jurisdiction of the court which passed the decree, sufficient, that is important, sufficient to satisfy such a decree, and has property within the local limits of the jurisdiction of such other court. Therefore, he has to point out the property that is cited as a way of security or as the schedule of the court, and which can be brought for sale for realizing the decreed amount. If not sufficient, he can always approach the court, the very court which passed the decree, saying that the property already shown in the plight is not sufficient for satisfying the decree that is passed. Therefore, he is having the defendant, though residing in the jurisdiction of another court, but having property within the jurisdiction of another court, kindly transmit the decree to that court where the plaintiff, the decree holder, can file an execution petition and also bring the property for sale. In those cases also the decree will be transmitted. Then, if the decree directs the sale or delivery of immovable property situated outside the local limits of jurisdiction which passed it, and suppose in the decree itself there may be a provision. Suppose while passing the decree, granting the decree format, the court feels that the properties are all situated outside the jurisdiction of this court, and it can point out that the properties are already there within the jurisdiction of another court. Therefore, the plaintiff is at liberty to execute the decree in that court. If such a provision is made in the decree itself, of course, it can also be, such a decree can also be transmitted to another court. But here also one rider. The rider means that you have to file an application and get a formal order of transmission. And next is, if the court which passed the decree consider for any other reason which it shall record in writing that the decree should be executed by such other court. Here also, a power has been conferred on the court which passed the decree. Suppose it can itself, suppose if it feels fit in its discretion, the other court may be the proper court for executing the decree. The decree can also be sent to that court or transmitted to that court for the purpose of filing an execution petition. But in this case, it has to give a proper reason why it thinks fit that such a decree should be transmitted to the other court. The reason should be would be acceptable or legally permissible. If such a reason is given, then also that decree can be transmitted to another court for execution. And suppose the decree is passed by a court, and during the pendency of the suit, because of the change of pecuniary jurisdiction, some other courts are also given pecuniary jurisdiction, so that the matter in issue before the court wherein the suit is pending can also be tried by another court because of the enhancement of the pecuniary jurisdiction in another court. The court, after passing the decree, may send it, but provided that court must be subordinate to this court. The court which passed the decree can also send it to a subordinate court. In case the subordinate court is also having jurisdiction to decide that case which is pending. That means you can visualize a situation. When the suit was filed, the court may, that is the only court which has the jurisdiction. But during the pendency of the suit, that because of the change of pecuniary jurisdiction or the financial limit of the courts, some subordinate court may also be given power to deal with a case, the stake of which is lesser. Lesser means the amount that is claimed is lesser than the amount which is than the amount for which the court is given this pecuniary jurisdiction. Therefore, if that small court comes into existence, having jurisdiction to decide the case which is already pending before the earlier court, then also this court can send it to that lower court. Sorry, not lower court, subordinate court. You can make a note. You can make a note that is subordinate court. It can send the decree for execution to that subordinate court. Then one important condition is, having said all this, a question will arise whether a court can send the decree for execution to any other court it wishes. No. There is a strong prohibition. Therefore, with all what I have said, now you have to take into account there is a prohibition. That is subsection 4 of section 39. Subsection 4 of 39, which clearly says that nothing in this section shall be deemed to authorize the court which passes a decree to execute the decree against any person or property outside the local limits of its jurisdiction. Therefore, if the person is out of its jurisdiction, if the immovable property which is sought to be proceeded against in execution of the decree is also out of its jurisdiction, in those cases, simply there is a prohibition. It cannot be done. An executing court or a court which passed the decree has no jurisdiction at all. In such cases, you cannot file an application for transmission of the decree. If the defendant has no nexus with the jurisdiction of the court which passed the decree, or if the property in respect of which the execution petition is sought to be filed has no nexus with the jurisdiction of the court which passed the decree, then there is a clear prohibition under subsection 4 of section 39. The court has no power at all. Therefore, you have to keep it in mind clearly. Those cases where the properties are outside, and also the defendants are the judgment debtors are residing out of its jurisdiction, then the court has no power at all. Then the other provisions of law, which I have already cited, the court territorial jurisdiction, and section 16 to 20 will come into play. You have to study those sections, which I have already explained. Section 16, 20, then come to this section. Therefore, there is subtle differences. You have to study minutely, and also you can take down those points where it differs. Therefore, it may confuse. Having said, in section 39, there are powers. These powers can be exercised only when certain conditions are present. But if those conditions are present only, this section 39 or for transmission of the decree will arise. But under subsection 4, the transmission will not arise when the subject matter is out of the jurisdiction, and also the judgment that are also residing away or out of the jurisdiction of the court. Then section 40, if the decree is sent to another court, or if this decree is transmitted to another court for execution, which we have seen in section 39. What is the power of the court, or what is the obligation of the court which is received that decree? That decree, what is the power of that court? The court or transferee court, that is called transferee court, can exercise all the powers which is the original executing court or the original court which passed the decree, all the powers which the original that court has, that the court which passed the decree has the power to execute it. There are so many powers regarding execution. The very same power which is the executing court or the original trial court or the original executing court has can be exercised by the transferee court as if the suit is decreed by itself. As if the suit is decreed by itself or the decree is granted by that court. There's no difference at all between the court which transfers and also the court which receives that decree for the purpose of execution. Therefore, it will execute in the manner as done or as empowered by the trial court. Then, after executing the decree, the transferee court should inform the transferor court, saying that this decree has been executed in such and such number on such and such date or by such and such manner. The decree transmitted to that court is executed. It has to certify that such and such decree has been executed in full. Suppose in case the decree is not executed, then it also should inform the court which transferred, saying that what are the circumstances attending such failures or what are the reasons for which are reasons as to why that decree could not be executed. They should also send a brief note as to why that decree has not been executed. Therefore, the court which sends the decree for execution to another court is always supposed to keep a track over the decree that has been sent. Therefore, it has some not supervision. It has to watch what has happened. Therefore, a requirement is now put upon the transferee court to inform the court which transfers the decree. It has to be informed. That is section 41. Then, as I have already said, section 42 also amplifies what I have said regarding the power of the transferee court. The transferee court has the power that is provided under section 42. Powers of court in executing the transferred decree. It has to deal with the decree or execute the decree as if that decree has been passed by the trial court, which I have already said. Suppose in case the judgment debtor does not obey the order of the executing court, then the power is that he can be put in civil prison for the disobedience of the order. That means the transferee court can punish a person who disobeys the order of the transferee court. Therefore, that power is conferred. And also, this transferee court has also the power to transmit to another court or transfer it to another court, as in the case of the original court, which has the power to transmit it under section 39. The power which a court has, or which the power which the court which passed the decree, or the power of the court which passed the decree, can send the decree for execution under section 39 under certain circumstances. Likewise, the transferee court also can transmit the very same decree to another court for execution. Therefore, there is no prohibition for the transferee court to send it for by execution by another court. This power is also granted. And also, the transferee court can execute the decree against the legal representatives of a decree, by judgment debtor. Suppose if the judgment debtor dies during the pendency of the EP, then also it can bring on record the LR. And there are some conditions when these LRs can be brought on record. Anyway, for the present, you take it that when a decree is pending execution, the judgment debtor dies, then necessarily the legal representative of that deceased judgment debtor has to be brought on, for which on the application of the decree holder, this judgment debtor can also be brought on record, so that the execution proceedings can be continued to be proceed or continue to proceed against the legal representatives also. Then section 46. 46 also an important provision that is dealing with what it calls precept. 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 Precept is nothing but an order or a certificate containing some instruction of the court which passed the decree. This precept is also, at the instance of the party, can be sent to another court for the purpose of execution only. But here, without any application, the court will send a precept. Only on the application of the party, the court will send a precept. But this precept can be sent not in conformity with the proceedings for which there are rules and regulations. But here precept is without reference to any legal provision. The party may request the court, kindly send a precept, that is a certificate, for attaching a property in cases of necessities, in cases of emergency. We don't have time for proceeding it in a court by manner known to us. Kindly immediately send a, you can even understand it as a certificate or an instruction in the form of a certificate. That is called precept. You send that precept to another court where, as we have already seen, where the defendant resides, voluntarily resides, permanently resides, and also working for it. And also the property is there within the jurisdiction, another court. And in that precept, the court will request the other court to attach the property which is involved in the suit filed before it. Therefore, it can request. It can be even said. It cannot be even an order. It is a request to the other court, kindly attach the property which is involved in the suit. Then thereafter, this order or this instruction will hold good only for 2 months only. The authority given to the other court by way of this precept will be valid only for 2 months under section 46. That this precept, the period of 2 months can be extended also. But in one circumstance, that precept need not be extended. Suppose in cases where the decree holder files an application for sale of the property in the transferring court, and by the time the decree that is passed by the trial court is transferred to this court before the expiry of that 2 months, then there's no time limit. That the precept will loses its value. Then on the basis of the decree that is transferred to that court, the court will proceed further. But in cases where the decree is not transmitted to this court, it has to get permission or it has to get extension before determination of the earlier order. That order determination means that termination or coming to an end. It is valid for 2 months, and this on the expiry or just before the date of expiry by another precept or by another order of the court which issued the precept. This order, precept, the period of precept may be extended. Otherwise, the validity of the precept will lapse after the expiry of 2 months. But only exception that in case before the expiry of that precept period, that is 2 months, if the order itself, the very decree itself is transferred to the other court, then you need not bother about the limitation of 2 months. It will be further extended. But one condition being that there should be an application pending for sale of the property filed by the decree holder. Then next section is 47. Section 47 is an important section which every lawyer at the instance of the judgment debtor used to invoke the jurisdiction of the executing court. Suppose if the judgment debtor is faced with an execution proceedings filed by the decree holder on the basis of a decree. Now the question will arise, whether a decree can be executed. Suppose anybody can say this, there is judgment debtor will usually say this decree is not executable and also not enforceable. Simply saying it is inexecutable and unenforceable. This inexecutable and unenforceable means you have to see from out of the decree. Out of the decree means away from the decree, not within the decree. Within the decree means the defenses which you have already taken in the suit by the defendant, and that has been overruled, and a decree passed in favor of the plaintiff, then you cannot once over again that take the very same defense by way of an attack in a proceedings under section 47. 47 gives some power or some rights to the judgment debtor to attack the decree. But this power is given or right is given within a narrow, very, very narrow campus. But even otherwise, if it comes within that narrow campus, if it can be shown, if it is inexecutable, unenforceable means you have to attack the decree from outside, not within itself. Therefore, you have to see why it is not inexecutable. Suppose if the decree is passed by a court without having any jurisdiction, or if a decree is passed as against a prevailing law, or any statute, and also the court passed a wrong decree on the basis of a wrong appreciation of law, then also it goes to the very root. Or suppose if the court is not having jurisdiction at all, and a decree has been passed, in those cases, if you point out to the court that though there is a decree, whether it can be executed. No executing court will execute such a decree if it is pointed out that the decree has been obtained in derogation to a law that is prevailing, or that is in force in India, and also if it is obtained and the court passes a decree without taking into account such a law, then it can be attacked. Then one more case is, suppose if the decree is obtained by fraud, if the decree is obtained by fraud or by documents which are fabricated, which are forged, in those cases also sometimes, if it is proved as fraud, then the court will always entertain such plea put forward by the judgment debtor. Then one cardinal principle you have to understand with regard to a decree: the decree cannot, or the court will not go beyond the scope of it. One, then the court will not go behind the decree. It will not go behind the decree. The court will execute the decree as it stands. You cannot modify it, or you cannot say that this decree is not in order because the proof or also the evidence that given in the suit different. You can't say. The court will not go behind the decree. The court will simply shut its eye and pass an order of execution. This is the normal procedure. A decree that is passed has to be executed by the executive court, either by the trial court or the court to which that decree has been transferred. Therefore, it cannot be taken exception to, unless it comes within the narrow canvas of that fraud and also inexecutability on the ground that the decree has been passed in violation of any law, and also suppose any defectively filed suit, and also the suit has been entertained by a court of non-competence or a court which doesn't have any competence, jurisdiction. These are all points that you can always urge before the executing court by filing an application under section 47. Therefore, now it is the decree, the judgment debtor is at the neck of the movement. Therefore, if in order to escape the rigor of the executing court while executing a decree, they have some limited power. That if that decree is hit or questioned on the ground of what I have said earlier, that is inexecutable or unenforceable, then the court will not proceed to execute the decree at all. Here you have to file an application under section 47. A judgment debtor has to file an application. This section 47 or any application filed under section 47 has to be decided as a suit. No separate suit is permitted. Therefore, in cases of any objection that can be raised against the executability of the order, then it cannot be taken by way of another suit. Therefore, even if it is a suit, like it can be treated as a suit, the EP court will function as a civil court and decide it as a suit. The EP court under section 47 will decide it as a suit. Therefore, it is nothing but a suit which you cannot take it by a separate suit. That is the prohibition. And also, otherwise, if it doesn't come within that narrow campus, the merit of the decree or the legality of the decree cannot be questioned at all in an executing court. Executing court will execute it. And who are the party? Can any party attack the enforceability of the decree in an execution proceedings? Of course, the judgment debtor can always question it, because usually the execution petitions or execution proceedings are initiated against the judgment debtor. He is always a party because he is a party in the suit. Likewise, a person who purchased the property at the time of execution or on execution of the decree will also become a party. Though he may not be a party in the suit, as far as section 47 application is concerned, the party that is mentioned in that section will include a person who purchased the property also during the pendency of the EP petition. He will automatically become a party. You can always question the decree by implementing that purchaser also in that application. Suppose if the purchaser purchased the property in an execution, which is under question in an application filed under section 47, you can always implement that purchase and question that sale in favor of the purchaser. The court will entertain that application, though it implemented a party who is not a party in the suit, but it is treated as a party under section 47. Therefore, a purchaser is also party. And one more thing you have to understand: this decree, if it is obtained by fraud, it can be raised as a point of objection, or it can be attacked saying that this decree has been obtained by fraud. One, then it has been obtained in a court which has no jurisdiction. And likewise, if the decree is against a law enacted by parliament or state, then in those cases, at this limited extent, you have the liberty to question that decree in the execution proceedings. And this decree can be avoided in collateral proceedings also. Not necessarily, this inexecutable decree can be questioned only at the time when the decree sought to be executed. If, according to your understanding as a lawyer, suppose if the decree is obtained by fraud or against any other statute, and also for reasons which I have said, which will render a decree inexecutable, that can be raised. Such an objection can be raised not only in execution proceedings under the party, but in also collateral proceedings. Collateral proceedings mean, suppose if you are proceeding with a case in by proceeding with a case in another court or on a different occasion, and if this decree is ought to be produced and any advantage taken on the basis of the decree, you can always avoid it, or you can always question it there itself. If it is produced, you can always question that decree, saying that this decree is inexecutable. This decree is obtained by fraud or issued by a court without any jurisdiction, and also it is opposed to law, in violation of the law, these question can always, these objection can always be taken, not only in the execution proceeding, but wherever it is sought to be introduced or filed in a collateral proceeding, you can avoid it by saying that it is in the execution. Then legal representatives. This legal the bringing on record the legal representatives of a deceased judgment debtor is provided under section 50. And what is the significance of bringing the legal representative in an execution proceeding? Normally, after the decree is passed, the judgment debtor may die, may not be alive. He might have died after the decree has been passed by the trial court. In such circumstances, the legal representative can be proceeded against. But there is a condition, precedent is that the legal representative might have got the property of the deceased judgment debtor or the defendant on his death. Suppose if the legal representative or representative succeed to the property of the judgment debtor, then to that extent that the execution can be levied against the legal representatives. Suppose no property devolved upon them as a hire, then that legal representative cannot be implemented at all or cannot be brought on record. Therefore, the only condition is the property which might have come to their hands by way of inheritance. If they don't have the property left by the judgment debtor, then the legal representative cannot be brought on record. That is section 50. That it restricts to the right of the decree holder only to such of those decree holder in whose hands the property has come down by way of devolution after the death of the party. That means the judgment debtor. Judgment. Then next is, what are the powers of the executing court? The power of the executing court, both the court, the transferor court as well as the transferee court. Whichever court that is empowered to execute a decree, the power is given under section 51. Here also, the execution proceedings can be initiated only at the instance of the decree holder, without invoking the jurisdiction of the executing court under section 51. No court will execute the decree. Therefore, it has to be initiated only at the instance of the decree holder. That is, upon such invocation of the jurisdiction, what are the powers of the executing court? The executing court will execute the decree by delivery of property. Suppose if the suit is for recovery of an immovable property, then the court will, the executing court will direct the judgment debtor to deliver the property that is specifically mentioned in the suit or that is specifically mentioned in the decree. The court will direct the judgment debtor to deliver the property. That is the first power. The second power is by attachment and sale. It can, as a preliminary measure, the executing court can attach the property while considering the application for execution, and it will be kept under attachment. Then, on hearing both the parties, the executing court may even permit the decree holder to bring the property for sale, or the property will be brought for sale by the court itself. The court can sell the property and realize the proceeds, and the proceeds will be turned over to the decree holder. And next is, and one more power is, it even without attachment, the executing court can sell the property as a measure of execution. Therefore, both powers are there. It can be preceded by an attachment, order of attachment. And also, without attachment also, the property can be sold by the executing court according as the circumstances demand. And the next is the executing court can appoint a receiver also. Suppose if the property cannot be dealt with by the executing court, or it is not convenient for the executing court to deal with that property till the execution proceedings are decided, the executing court may appoint a receiver and direct the receiver to deal with that property as per its direction. He can sell the property and also bring the proceeds to the deposit of the court. Likewise, the executing court can appoint a receiver. This receiver may be the party, one of the parties itself, or any third person, or by a commissioner appointed by a court, sorry, by a receiver appointed by a court. It may be an advocate also. If the executing court can appoint a receiver who may be a private person, or it may be a party to the proceedings also, and also it may be an advocate. The receiver can exercise all the powers of the court with regard to deal with that property in execution by the executing court. Then by appointing a receiver also. And the executing court has such other power as is necessary for proceeding with the execution smoothly. It has also some inherent power that is provided under subsection E of main section 51. It has ample power, that is inherent power, so as to facilitate the exercise of power of execution by the executing court. And one more important provision regarding execution is detention in prison. Suppose in case a person who is having sufficient resources, who neglects to pay the decreed amount, then the court will always put him in prison. That is called detention in prison. The judgment debtor will be put in prison or detained in civil prison. And under what circumstances the judgment debtor will be put in possession, put in prison, civil prison. That is, in cases, as I have already said, he has sufficient resources and he neglects to pay or he refuses to pay. In such circumstances, the decree holder can send a notice saying or calling upon him to pay the money. So if he doesn't reply or he doesn't pay the money as demanded by the decree holder, then you can always apply for detention of that decree holder in prison. This is a way of coercing the judgment debtor to pay the money. This is one way the executing court has given power therefore. Now, that the condition is that the judgment debtor with the object or effect of delaying the execution of the decree. Suppose if he doesn't pay it under one pretext or other, though he has the means to pay and he wants to avoid payment of the decree amount to the decree holder, then also the court can pass an order on the application of the decree holder for detention of the judgment debtor. Then next is, if he is likely to abscond or leave the local limits of the jurisdiction of that particular court, that is the executing court, then also if he is likely to abscond or leave the local limits of the jurisdiction, then also he can be put in detention. And in one more circumstance, suppose after filing the execution petition, or sorry, not after, it may be even after the institution of the execution court by execution, and also during the pendency of the suit, if the defendant in the suit disposes of a part of the property secretly and also fraudulently in order to defeat the interest of the decree holder when the decree is passed, then also if it is pointed out to the court, executing court, that he has secreted a portion of the suit property from the jurisdiction of the court by way of sale or by way of encumbering the property, then also you can invoke the jurisdiction of the executing court for detaining the judgment debtor in prison. Therefore, you have to point out that he has fraudulently transferred a portion of the property to somebody else without the knowledge of the plaintiff or even without the knowledge of the court. This is a fraudulent transfer done or that has been done in order to defeat the interest of the decree holder or interest of the plaintiff at the time of passing the decree. Then is the decree holder, as I already said, has the means to pay. Means, this is the very word used in the section. Suppose the decree holder has the means to pay, in spite of having resources, sufficient resources to pay the decree amount, he remains silent, or he remains unwilling to pay the decreed amount. Then also the court will intervene. Therefore, you have what all required by when you file the petition for detention is that you have sent a notice to the judgment debtor calling upon him to pay. In spite of the notice, receipt of the notice, the judgment debtor has not paid the amount. One. Second is that the judgment debtor at the time of, you take note of it, at the time of filing the application seeking his detention, he is now possessed of sufficient resources. That means only at the time when the application for detention is filed, that he must be possessed of wealth, sufficient wealth to satisfy the decree. Not he was a rich man before that application was filed. Now reduced to a poor man. This is not a criteria. He may be a rich man while filing the suit, or just prior to filing the application for this detention, he may be a rich man. But now he reduced to penury. That is not a criteria. What the court will look into is whether the person against whom this application for detention is filed is having sufficient means, sufficient resources at the time this application for detention is filed. That alone is the criteria. And one more condition is, suppose in case a person is directed to pay money by a decree, that is the money which has come to his hands in a fiduciary capacity. Suppose you entrust a valuable item of a movable, or like diamond ring, diamond golden chain, and also some security. These security, if the person with whom it is entrusted is converted into money by fraudulent means, and also money misappropriated. Here, a person has filed a suit, or you can say even bail or bailey. Bailor enters the property, the movable, with a bailey for safe custody. Suppose if he converts, if he fraudulently sells it and also converts into money and misappropriates it, always it can be, he can be proceeded against for the recovery of either the movable or the proceeds, sale proceeds. In those cases, if any money decree is passed against such a person, then here also you can proceed against him in the executing court for detention. This is also one of the conditions. And one thing, the court, it is also a discretionary relief or a power which can be exercised according to the discretion of the court. It is not always a must that the judgment debtor should be placed in detention or has to be taken into custody of the court. It is not always the intention. But genuinely or bona fidely, if a person is reduced to penury and he is not in a position to pay the amount, then also the court will condone. So the court will not entertain such an application for detention. The court will direct him to move against the judgment debtor by any other means, not by way of putting him in prison. And therefore the court will look into the financial position of the person. Then a slight elaboration of the provision which we have seen under section 50 in respect of a execution petition filed against the legal representatives after the death of the judgment debtor following the decree passed. There are, after the decree, if the judgment debtor dies, then the legal representatives will be brought on record as I already said, only he will be liable to the extent of the property which he has inherited or which has come to the hands of the legal representatives. Here, one more elaboration. Then section 52. 52 is also providing for execution against the legal representatives. Here, and also the property which has come into his hands. Where a decree is passed against a party as the LR of the deceased person and the decree is for payment of money out of the property of the deceased. Then if a decree says that the money in respect of which a decree has been given in favor of the plaintiff, and this money can be recovered from the property owned by the judgment debtor, that is the defendant. In that case also, if the defendant dies after the decree is passed, and also during the execution proceedings, if the judgment debtor is sought to be impleaded or brought on record as the legal representative of the deceased defendant, now the judgment debtor, and also in respect of which that property has been adjudged as the property which will defray the decreed amount, then also automatically on the death of the judgment debtor, the property might have come into the hands of the legal representatives of the deceased judgment debtor. Then also this judgment debtor will be, the legal representatives of the deceased judgment debtor will be proceeded against. Here, this is a direct provision. Of course, there is some gray areas in these proceedings. Whether in all circumstances judgment debtors, the legal representative can be brought on record, but this is a specific case or a specific instance for which the code provides that legal representatives can be brought on record when a decree itself says, or when the judge in the judgment itself says that this amount now decreed can be realized from the property retained or owned by the defendant. Then also the legal representatives, once they get it by way of devolution or surveyorship or by inheritance, if they possess that property, automatically that property can be proceeded against in an execution proceedings. And in those circumstances, definitely the legal representatives of the deceased judgment debtor are necessary parties. Therefore, they will be brought on record. That is provided under section 52. And in respect of ancestral property, how it can be proceeded against. Then section 53. Then you kindly read section 53 in the context of section 30. Section 50. Section 50 provides for bringing on record the legal representative, and the legal representatives are liable only to the extent of the property which they have received by way of surveyorship, heirship, everything else, or by devolution. In those cases, to that extent, they are liable. Here, section 53 says that the property, the ancestral property, can also be proceeded against, which comes to the hands of the descendants of the judgment debtor. And under what circumstance? That says, suppose for the purpose of section 50 and 52, property in the hands of the son or other descendant which is liable under Hindu law for the payment of a deceased ancestor. Therefore, here the property under the Hindu law, suppose comes into the hands of the son as a legal heir or any other descendant as a legal heir. And suppose that person in whose name the property stood when the proceeding or the suit was pending, here he has got it as a ancestral property, and for the debt the judgment debtor has taken when he was alive, whether Hindu law permits that property to be sold. Under Hindu law, whether that property can be, that property belongs to the Hindu joint family or a Hindu family that property belongs to the family. Whether a debt taken by the member of that family, and for payment of which the property which stands in his name is liable for defrayment of that loan. Suppose if it will bring other circumstances also. Suppose if the debt is taken for some other immoral purpose, or for some other reason which is not for the benefit of the family, for his expenses, for his personal expenses, in such of those cases, the ancestral property cannot be brought to sale by way of execution. In those cases, the property which are available or which can be proceeded against for the purpose of paying the loan taken by a debtor, a judgment debtor or a defendant, and also it has to be paid out of the family property on account of the provisions or the provisions of the Hindu law, then that much of the property which comes to the hands of the legal heirs or the legal representative can be proceeded against. In those cases also, the legal representatives can be brought on record for the purpose of attaching or selling the property by way of execution. That is given under section 53. And then the next important section is section 55. It also deals with once over again arrest and detention. As I have already said, the judgment debtor can be arrested and in execution of a decree and put in a civil prison, and there are certain exceptions. Whether it gives ample power, omnibus power to the executing court. Any person can be arrested anytime, any place. Suppose an order of detention is passed against a judgment debtor for failure to pay the amount that is provided under the decree, the power is enormous, omnibus. That person can be detained any time and also any place. Here, some exception. These judgment debtor cannot be arrested from a dwelling house after sunset and sunrise. You kindly note, after sunset and sunrise. But the rest of the time, he can be arrested if from a dwelling house. And if the dwelling house is, you forget about night, after sunset and sunrise. If the dwelling house is locked from inside by the judgment debtor, then also he can, whether the detaining authority authorized by the court can break open the door. Now, this can be broken open only when the judgment debtor refuse to come out or refuses or prevents the access of the detaining authority inside. Then in those cases, they can break open the main door of the house and go inside and arrest him. And in dwelling house also, once they gain entry into the house, and in the house also, suppose if he shut himself up in one of the rooms, then they can always break open. There is no necessity that he resists and also that he prevents the authority. If the question will not arise, they can, once they gain entry from the main door, after breaking open, their power is enormous. They can arrest him from any room wherein he is shut. And also, the one condition is that the dwelling house must be in occupancy. You take this dwelling house must be in occupancy of the judgment debtor. There are other houses also where he can hide. Therefore, I will come to that point a little later. Here, you must take note that the dwelling house, in respect of which we have been talking about, should be the house in occupancy of the judgment debtor, because we are speaking about that dwelling house wherein the judgment debtor resides. In such house, the main door can be broken open after he resists, and also, but one rider is that he cannot be arrested after sunset and before sunrise. Then in respect of dwelling house, in the occupancy of somebody else, or yeah, here also in occupancy of a woman. Suppose if it is in occupancy of a woman, some precaution has to be taken. If the woman, according to the custom or religious practice of that woman, she cannot come out in public, like a Parnadashin woman or some Muslim women also. They can't come out openly outside. In those cases, they will give time to that woman who cannot come out according to the custom or religious practice. Then they will request her to withdraw yourself into a hiding place or into a place where you cannot be seen. Then after giving sufficient time to withdraw herself from the view or public view of others, then they can enter the house and also arrest a judgment at all. But here the condition is if it is in the occupancy of that woman. Otherwise, there is no prohibition or there is no restriction. And then then it is also made liberal. Suppose if the arresting person or the officer at the instance of the executing court comes, and when he arrests that person, if that person gives the amount shown in the decree plus the expenses for the arrest, the cost of arrest to the arresting officer, then that arresting officer will release him forthwith. He will not thereafter arrest him. That power is given to that arresting authority. He can pay the amount to the arresting authority with the cost that has been incurred for this arrest, for this process of arrest. Then the arresting authority will release you forthwith, straight away. That's one condition. And also, one provision is given for the release of the judgment debtor when he is brought before the court. If the judgment debtor is brought before the court after arrest by the arresting officer, the court will always ask him whether you want to apply for insolvency. You kindly take note of it. This is also a provision which I have come across just now. You can always the judge or the detaining authority or the judge, the executing court will ask him whether you apply for insolvency. Insolvency means I am not able to pay the amount because I am resourceless. The court will ask him and also give him opportunity. If he says, yes, I will file a petition for declaration of insolvency, then the court will release him after getting an undertaking that he will file the insolvency petition within a month after getting security. Suppose in case he applies for it, he will be released immediately on the basis of the application and also the undertaking. Suppose if he doesn't apply for insolvency within 1 month, then not only his security will be realized and also he will be put in jail. Therefore, it is the condition, it has to be peremptorily, it has to be followed or it has to be peremptorily obeyed. This is one condition by which the judgment debtor will be released once brought before the executing court. Again, then one condition you have to note, it is an important provision, that is section 56. This detention cannot be made against a woman. This is one exemption. This detention for failure to pay decreed amount cannot be passed against a woman under section 56. Section 56 is a clear prohibition that reads, the court shall not order the arrest or detention in civil prison of a woman. There is no condition at all. There is a blanket prohibition given in section 56 against arresting a woman for failure to pay or failure to satisfy decreed amount. And in civil prison means a person will be detained in prison, but the expenses for which should be met by the decree holder. That is called subsidy for during the period of arrest, and also the expenses incurred for him by the state or by the jail should be borne by the decree holder. That is called a subsidy. And he will be kept in prison. The judgment debtor will be kept in prison only when the decree holder continues to pay the subsistence to that detainee. And 58, detention and release, and what are the period the executing court is empowered to detain a judgment debtor for failure to pay the decreed amount. Suppose if the decreed amount is below 2,000, no order can be passed below 2,000. And if it is above 2,000 and not exceeding rupees 5,000, then the judge, the executing court, can order his detention not exceeding 6 weeks. Kindly take note. If it is above 2,000 and below 5,000, the executing court can order the detention not exceeding 6 weeks. Not exceeding 6 weeks. And if the amount that is decreed is above 5,000 and more, then he can be put in prison for a period not exceeding three months. Therefore, it is only between 3 months and 6 weeks only. If the amount exceeding 5,000, unlimited amount, only the maximum period of imprisonment is only 3 months. Only 3 months.
Dear friends, we were almost closing the session for today, and faculty's net got some issues. He is not able to connect to us. Maybe we'll be closing the session for today, so that in the next session, sir will be continuing from where sir left actually. We thank Rajan sir for the session, and we thank Advocate Revati, his junior, for arranging this program along with us.